go to work. So Alvin and I will try to be respectful to the rest of you who have to go to work tomorrow. Or don't have to go to work tomorrow, whatever that might look like.
It's not Lumberton Spring Break?
No, which is a little frustrating, but somebody has a nice ringtone. What a pleasant ringtone you have.
Why is it in there?
I don't know, I meant to shut it off, but it's a song that is shout to the Lord.
It
and
is.
y'all, hey, it could have been honky tonky. Let's see who I missed.
Good thing the right person called. We might have got honky tonky.
Yeah.
It was your daughter.
Lisa.
Which one? I don't know if you're aware, but I have three.
I put it on the back.
That's not her.
I was gonna say she didn't get grandma, so now she's calling you.
I'm not answering Elisa this time.
That's somebody that wants to give me a free trip to Aruba or something.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Woohoo.
Right.
My primary topic was that song Carrie Underwood dug her keys and threw the side. It was pretty. It was that for about 2 weeks, and Alan said that just wasn't appropriate. So I changed it to Family Opera.
Funny. I finally just went to the traditional ones because I got embarrassed every time my phone started singing in the store. Well, this week we're going to be talking about the idea of advocacy. And Patsy, I can relate. I got here and realized I did not have my notes or my book, so I'm feeling very unprepared tonight. Mercifully, there's cloud storage, so I was able to pull my notes out of Dropbox. But the book is
You mean about
on my kitchen table doing us no good.
You mean about Esther?
No, you
Oh,
couldn't.
that's-
No.
Oh, this
Your
is-
phone and your glasses being all over the place. I'm feeling a little disheveled tonight as well. But
Is that
I am ready to talk about Esther, so we shall do that.
About,
She's starting her
Hi.
time.
That's all right. You have
talk
those
to
in
me
the
after, don't run out.
I'll try not to.
We'll watch her.
I have a short memory.
Me too. I'd love to help you, but I'll have forgotten for sure.
And a couple of short children too.
Yeah, I have more of those than my memory, yeah.
That's where the memory went, probably.
That's why you have a short memory.
Yep. So this week we're going to talk about advocacy, which is the process of challenging ourselves and our leaders to change attitudes, behaviors, and policies that perpetuate injustice and deny God's will for all creation to flourish, which, if you'll remember back to last week, can anybody tell us what vocabulary word we use for that idea of flourishing? It's a Hebrew word, I'll give you a hint.
Oh, yeah.
So deep or something like that?
All I remember is shalom.
That's the word I was looking for. So well done, star pupil. Shalom, yeah.
Oh.
That idea of wholeness for all of God's creation. And so advocacy includes several components. It includes transformation. So advocacy brings about change. And we will talk about, obviously advocacy includes then other parties, right? You advocate to someone. So we'll talk about whom all that might include. But it also includes an examination of our own attitudes and behaviors while challenging and calling out systems and structures. Identifying the root cause of injustice. I think we talked about that a little bit last week. It's that idea of being holistic in our approach, right? So you start by giving someone a fish, then you teach them how to fish, then you figure out what kept them from getting to the pond in the first place, and then you figure out who polluted the problem, who polluted the pond, and so that we're addressing all of the problems to bring about systemic change. And there is a component of obtaining equal power for people who are often excluded from important decision making. By the way, does anybody know what World Day this is? If you're on social media, you've probably seen that it's World Women's Day, yeah. Which again is about giving a voice to a lot of people around the world who are not always given that voice. So I asked you last week to take a look at Esther this week. So I'd like to spend a little time talking about Esther. Does anybody have time to read Esther? Did you? Okay. See, she is the star student tonight.
Well, I'm also retired.
I am presuming that most of us are familiar with the story of Esther, but let's do a little recap. Who can tell us, what can you tell me about the story of Esther? Can anybody kind of summarize Esther for me?
I ought to, but, one thing is that, the whole 10 chapters, that God wasn't mentioned at all,
Yes.
the whole chapter, and that I couldn't believe. There may be some more books that doesn't mention God, but that was one that
Mhm.
didn't. And,
And yet God is extremely present in the
well,
book of
the
Esther.
fasting and the, prayers that, Esther asked Malachi. For.
Okay.
Mordecai.
Mordecai.
Mordecai. Well, my cat's Malachi, so, and I forgot.
I guess that's close.
That's close enough. Just don't ask me to read some of the things in there, but,
Deal.
and, I was really impressed with, how, Esther knew that she was risking her life, and yet she stood up for, her people.
Okay.
Those people,
Her Jewish family, her Jewish people.
okay, well, she was a Moabite.
Well, she was, I thought she was Jewish. You mean I studied this whole thing and she wasn't a Jew?
Mordecai was a Jew.
He was.
Well, and that was her cousin, so that there gotta be some kind of blood there somewhere, bloodline, but,
She's certainly a representative of the Hebrew people.
She always did what Mordecai said, and then when she asked Mordecai asked her to pray and fast, he did it. So
Mhm.
it was turned around.
Okay.
I remember she was kind of an outsider, and she had really a heart for God and a heart for a loving heart, because even though she wasn't Jewish and she was in Moab, she went and followed her mother-in-law back. She loved her mother-in-law.
You're talking Ruth,
Talking
yeah.
about Ruth.
Oh, okay.
Ruth did
So
that.
see, he was talking about Ruth being a Moabitess. You're fine. You out theologied the elder tonight.
This whole book, and I thought, man, I'm sure it is.
So, perhaps in the interest of consistency and accuracy, let's do a quick recap on Esther, shall we? Because at the moment we're mixing our Bible stories, and that could make for a really interesting conversation. So it is a 10-chapter book, and we begin with the dethroning of a queen, right? You have this king of Persia, and he calls for his queen, and I think already you see some system of injustice happening in Esther, right? Because he calls for his queen, and what is it that he really would like for her to do for his party guests?
Strip.
So,
Yep. He wants his queen to show up in nothing but her crown, right? And show off just how beautiful she is. And credit to Queen Vashti, she refuses, but also then she's done. And we don't really know what happens to her other than she's not queen anymore. So the king needs a new queen and holds a beauty pageant over the course of a very long time and brings in many candidates for queen, and probably also a very demeaning way, I would guess. But he chooses Esther, and Esther is a representative of the Hebrew people, but her king doesn't know that. And we have this kind of showdown between Esther's cousin Mordecai and the second in command to the king, Haman, our villain of the story, right? And Haman is a very powerful man, and he wants everyone to know how powerful he is, and so he commands people to bow down to him, and Mordecai, of course, refuses. And because he is Jewish, Haman targets the Jews and gets the king to agree to this order, basically to exterminate the Hebrew people. And so then we have this series of mourning among the Hebrew people. Mordecai comes to Esther, who's in a position of influence because she's been chosen by the king. And she's a little reluctant to help, right? And I love chapter 4 in particular because that's that great piece where Mordecai says, perhaps you've been called here for what?
Such a
Such a
time.
time.
Such a time as this, right? This is probably why you're here, baby. This is your moment. And so she agrees to go before the king. And those of you who studied Esther a little bit, what is the procedure for going before the king?
She has to be called.
Okay, so she goes uninvited. And what is the risk?
She can be killed.
Mm-hmm.
But if I perish, I perish.
Right, if I perish, I perish. Yes. Mercifully, she's pretty and he likes her, so he invites her in. She's welcomed in. So does she come at the king with her immediate, like, I need you to save the Jews request?
No,
No.
she's real,
She never lets him know she's Jewish to the end.
Okay.
she's real quiet.
She invites him to dinner. She invites him to dinner.
Wait till Dennis Ford.
The king and Haman. They go to dinner. Apparently the dinner goes well. At the end of the dinner, she has her moment, right? Queen Esther, ask me anything, I will give it to you. And what does she ask for? Would you come back tomorrow? Okay. Yeah. Okay. How about if you come back tomorrow
And bring Haman.
and bring Haman? So that's kind of where we leave off. And then Haman's out in the street feeling pretty snazzy about himself because he got invited to the queen's house again for a second night. And he runs into Mordecai again. And there's another exchange and there's an argument and he's had it with him. He has the gallows built to have Mordecai hung. And in the meantime, the king is restless and can't sleep. And so I think I left out this part in the summary, right? There's a scene early in the book where Mordecai overhears gossip about a plot to assassinate the king, right? And he's able to make that known to the king. It's recorded in the Book of Chronicles. So the king can't sleep, and he has the history book read to him. And he's just having these events read back to him, and he's reminded of this moment when Mordecai saved his life. And he says, we ought to throw that guy a party. And so he brings Haman in, and he says, if a guy did all these wonderful things, what would you do for him? And, of course, who does Haman think he's talking about? Himself. So he's like, oh, you should do all kinds of great stuff for that guy. And then finds out that it's, of course, his mortal enemy. And so he's pretty humiliated by that whole thing. And Haman is sort of forced to honor his enemy. And then they go back to Queen Esther's house. And at this point, Esther finally tells him what's up. My life is being threatened. My people's lives are being threatened. Well, who would do this to my queen? And of course, then she points out that it's Haman. Haman is hanged from the gallows he had built for Mordecai. Oddly, this edict or this order for the Jews to be exterminated really doesn't go away, but he grants the Jews the right to defend themselves, and they are victorious. And we have these Jewish feasts begun, and Mordecai is honored, right? Mordecai is made second in rank and held in high esteem. Chapter 10, verse 3 says, Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. So Esther scholars, did we leave anything out? What else do you notice about Esther? There anything that you would point out about the book?
Well, Malachi refused to Mordecai.
She can call Malachi. We'll translate it.
Jackson.
Yeah.
We know what you mean.
Anyway, he refused to bow down, and that's why Haman was so mad at him.
Okay.
He sat at the gate all the time trying to figure out all the stuff that was going on with Queen Esther.
Okay.
I
Mordecai was
admire
sharp,
him
don't
for
you
that.
think? Yeah. I think he was very sharp. Why do you think that Esther was hesitant to speak at first, right? Like there's several moments that you can look at the story and go, what are you doing? Why do you think she's hesitant to speak out?
Well, gosh, I mean, she had to be nervous, gonna accuse the king's right-hand man of this terrible thing. She knows what happened to Vashti for something, relatively minor. Now she's gonna accuse
I think that's a really good
this
point.
important man, may I say, of
Yeah.
And the king, I think, did not realize that she was a Jew.
No,
You know,
and she seems reluctant to make that known. But yeah, I think you're right, Bonnie. I don't think you can undersell the significance of her position is not that secure, regardless of how beloved she is. Clearly, the last queen was beautiful as well.
The thing that impresses in my mind is that each step she took was bathed in prayer. Not just by her, not just by Mordecai, but by all of the people he could find. So, I've had times when I had to go to somebody with something I didn't think they were really gonna like to hear.
Mhm.
And I just prayed and prayed and prayed about it. And it worked out okay. So, you know, to me, that's one of the most important things is that she had the faith in God to handle it.
Okay.
To get a good outcome.
I think probably the first step, you know, the I die kind of thing. I think probably she didn't know what was gonna happen after that. I think that she just was like,
She may not have had a plan.
I gotta get in, and once I get in, I'll figure the rest of it out. Because I think that at first she was probably concerned with her own life. And then it was, okay, now I'm in, now I have the entire Israelite, the entire Jewish people on my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
I better not mess that up. And so I think it went from, okay, if I die, I gotta build up the courage to do that. I didn't die, so now what? And he said, you know, okay, I wanna do this right, I wanna make sure it's the right way, the right timing, and so I think there's quite a lot of pressure there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Esther was an advocate?
I do,
Okay.
for her people.
For her people? Patsy mentioned that we don't hear God's voice specifically. Like God doesn't speak in this chapter. He's not specifically mentioned by name in this book. Do you think that God called Esther to be an advocate? Okay. What?
Mordecai did too, when he told her that you were probably here for such a time as
Right.
this or something.
What about Mordecai? Is Mordecai an advocate?
Yes.
oh yeah.
So he's leveraging sort of the influence that he has with Esther, and then asking her to leverage, the influence she has with, a more powerful level.
Was it though that she was called, or was it that she was just in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What I mean by that is not so much that she wasn't called, but is it so much that she had a specific calling, or that anyone who was part of God's people who was in that position might have been called to do the exact same thing?
Which is exactly where I wanted to go with that.
Oh,
Yeah.
man, I ruined it.
We had a little conference ahead of time in case this wasn't going to. I'm kidding. Yeah, I think that there really could be something to that, right? That idea that if you know something is wrong and you have the power to influence it, do you need to be told to do it, or is that simply a part of your call as one of God's people to do something about it?
Isn't it Mordecai who's like, if you don't do this, then, God's gonna take care of it. Somebody else is going to do it.
Right.
But, if you don't do this, then it's kind of bad on you.
Why wouldn't you do this? Yeah.
She had to be talked into it.
Yeah, she did.
But consider the culture. Women were to be in the shadows. They weren't supposed to step out and do something like that.
And she had always done what he told her to.
Yeah, no, I think there are a
She's
lot of
always done it.
systems and a lot of those.
She was a good Jewish woman,
Yes.
Not to mention, she's probably very young.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I do think all of those things
I think
come into
Mordecai
play.
probably educated her probably more than the average Jewish girl. But still, she was not raised to have voice.
Her job was to look good.
It took them a whole year to, I found that mighty funny that it took a whole year for her to get ready for the.
Right? What were those beauty treatments?
I don't know, but I thought I was reading it wrong when they
Sign
said
me up for that.
12 months.
They rounded up a whole lot of women, they had to filter through them.
Wow.
Maybe they had acne.
I mean, I could look pretty good in a year if I was, all that was happening.
Well,
Well, now, mister. that's enough.
Moving on before it gets spicy in here. Esther's advocacy, I think, was inspired by the call of those in oppression, right? There was certainly somewhat of a call from her people. The Jewish people are fasting and praying, and they're reacting. Do you think that their involvement is an important dynamic in this story? The role of the Hebrew people in the towns.
definitely.
I mean, knowing that all of those people are praying for her, like Francis said, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
She realized how important it was.
Okay. And if anybody did call her to action, perhaps
Yeah.
that's part of what does. Although I don't. My
You
personal.
know, if it was just one or two people that's gonna get killed, you might say, nah. Especially if it's somebody you knew and didn't like.
Hmm.
but this is like everyone she knew and grew up with.
And if they ever found out that she was Jewish, she
They
was.
kill her too.
Right.
She
Right.
was kinda, dang it, she did, and dang it, she didn't.
That's kind of the way I see it.
Uh-huh.
So it was kind of a no-lose proposition for her.
Or no win.
Get up, well, win?
Or no win.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Well, if she didn't say anything,
Kill me now, kill me later.
yeah, something like that.
I would imagine that at some point, something had to have leaked out to somebody while she was living in the palace for a year. That she could be Jewish, you know. I mean, after she became a queen, you never know if she leaked it to one of her servants or something, Maybe they caught her doing something Jewish.
Right.
So it probably wouldn't have been that big of a secret for that many years, for too many more years.
Well, that's what I'm saying, she was gonna die sooner or later if she didn't do something now. But that's a fatalistic look.
What's wrong with that? So we kind of looked at Esther and Mordecai in the story, the advocates, right? And then you had Haman, who's the oppressor, but the oppressed, the Jewish people. We kind of talked about their role in terms of bringing about change and what was it that they were doing. So maybe kind of stepping beyond the story at this point and segueing into a little bit of another discussion. Do you see any risks if those who are oppressed have no voice in advocacy? If those who are privileged and those who are in places of influence do all of the advocating and do not involve the oppressed in the process, what could go wrong there? Or could it?
I mean, if you're not like hands-on, all up in that business, then you don't know necessarily what all of the needs and everything are. You can't just say, "Oh, you're oppressed. Let me fix you."
Right.
Look at what happened when Moses, he was an advocate for the
That's a
nation of
good
Israel, and he killed a guy, and it all backfired on him because he was doing what he thought he should do instead of helping getting them
That's a good
involved.
point. And I think frequently when we look at the children of Israel in that story, even after the Exodus and all of that, you do have a group of the oppressed who maybe never fully grasped the entire situation, understood the magnitude of their freedom, understood the magnitude of their oppression in the first place. And so there's like a consumer thing with the children of Israel there that, they're always complaining, they're always kind of wanting more, that Yeah, that's a good point, Alan.
I'm thinking that if the poor aren't helped, that eventually, if this went on for years and years and decades and such, that we could develop back into a society like, say, England and France had, back in the 1500s, where there were two classes. You either had it or you didn't. And the didn'ts were dirty and uneducated and,
Don't we have that to a certain extent though? We do.
I think so.
It's
Our middle
mostly
class
the
is-
rich people who get a good education.
Right. Our middle class is fading quickly, I think.
I think we can assume when we live in a different social class, what people need. I think that's why it comes back to having to build some kind of relationship to know what the needs really are. I mean, you could go in and provide,
Bilingual
medicine.
books when they really need lights on their driveway.
Exactly.
Right.
Or give them, medicine because they all have diarrhea and they haven't cleaned up their food, their
Right.
water supply, and they're just gonna continue. So you have to know where you are and what the needs are, and not just assume that we're gonna come save the day with our money.
Right.
Well, yeah, like I'm saying, the rich people back then, they would just throw out a few coins and say, oh,
Call
well,
it a
I've
day.
done my thing,
Well, it's, now you're talking about systems like you talked about last time.
Right.
It's that if you don't have the people that are oppressed in the conversation, and not only that, but enabling them and empowering them,
Right.
not enabling, empowering is probably a better word, but then it's just gonna be, like you say, it's just gonna be charity. It's gonna be-
Right. We never move beyond giving a fish away.
Entitlement
Mm-hmm.
instead of empowerment.
I think it's especially risky where differences in culture are involved. Like
Yes.
the bigger the culture differences, the riskier it gets.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking of that word that we've been tossing around in a lot of our other conversations for a while now, that incarnational idea, that being with people and for people, but the for them doesn't work very well if we're not with them. And so,
Mighty Mouse.
Mighty Mouse. No Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse doesn't, does Mighty Mouse bring justice? That's not a Mighty Mouse thing. I don't think so. Sorry.
How do you get Yep, I'll say yes.
So,
I see three very confused faces here.
Just YouTube.
It was black and white TV, does that give you an idea?
I didn't grow up on Mighty Mouse either.
Is this
And I'm
before or
old.
after Nikki?
She's younger than
Probably during
Mickey.
the first iteration of Mickey, the weird looking one with the pointy nose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're only vaguely aware of something. All right. So Esther and Moses both appealed to political leadership to end injustice. Do you see any way that, in particular in those two stories, of ending those systems of injustice without engaging the government? And I'll caveat that this part of the conversation makes me incredibly nervous.
Well, I mean, unless you just like send in a hitman to take out Haman. That's not very godly.
I watched that movie.
And that wouldn't really work after he's already made the decree.
Well,
Yeah, it was a priesthood, even though.
you know, I read a fabulous book this summer, the biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I mean that's essentially what they were doing. He was part of he was a theologian, and someone who sought community and justice and Christ in everything. But he was part of the Valkyrie conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, and ultimately was executed for it. So I mean, I don't, how far does that go? I don't know, and I don't necessarily want to get into a whole analysis of whether or not.
I don't wanna step on any toes, but I get really, really frustrated with people who don't at least get a vote. I mean, you've got to stand up for something or you'll lie down for everything.
And then don't bribe if your person, don't get it.
Really. Well, I mean, it's just like, I don't do it so much now, but years ago, I did write letters to state representatives, I did write letters to our US congressman.
Oh, you're like 10 minutes ahead of me. You're doing so good.
It's easy now. Yeah.
It is. If you go to the class website, I have made it really easy for you because I've put buttons in there that you can click. So
Is there a form letter to sign?
there totally is. Yeah, there is. Go to Micah Challenge. They have like tweets. They've already written them for you. So that is the segue as to where I wanted to go next. What do you think? Do you see a role for government in promoting flourishing and promoting that idea of shalom? Is that a government function?
I think the function of government is to, how can I say this? It's not, their function is not to suppress it or keep it from happening.
And if they can lend dollar support.
I think God calls us to work within the framework we were born in.
Whatever it is we've been given.
So I think God, if we live in a society with a government, God will use that government.
I like that.
Or in spite of that government, we can still make it.
Okay.
I think about after the hurricanes down here, there were church groups who came here and did work, but there were government grants involved to help finance this work. And that's what I mean by, a little working together, just the government just not getting in the way. And if there is the ability to provide some financial support, then let the people do what they need to do.
Okay. Would someone read Proverbs 31, 8 and 9?
After the New Testament. Sorry.
No, I think that she brought up
I thought we were. Thank you.
31. 8 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, within the rights of the poor and the needy.
Okay. So I think, well, I mean, let's be good at our exegesis, right? Because we've been listening to Tali's teaching as well. Proverbs 31 is advice given to a king by his mother, right? And she's telling him several things before she launches into, describing the perfect woman for him. And we'll not go there today. That woman, she's really annoying. I can't help but think, though, that the reason she's giving him this advice is because he's in a place of privilege and because he's in a place of influence. And so if we're applying our hermeneutic, is there anybody who was at Holly's class with me this morning, or am I just being smart? Like, okay, if we apply that to us, right, would you consider yourself someone who's in a position of privilege and or influence?
We all should.
We all should.
As Americans, period.
Yeah.
So are we out of line to apply this as advice to ourselves? Which means
I don't think there's people who are in positions of influence and people who are not. I think everyone has a certain
degree of influence. I like that.
I think some people in this room have more than others, maybe not drastically, but to some degree.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
And definitely some people in this country have far more influence than others.
Mm-hmm.
Like Laney may not have a lot of influence right now.
But she may grow up to be somebody really important.
But on the
But
other
she will,
hand,
yes,
Does she have
she
influence in
has
areas
more
that we don't?
influence
On the
where we
younger
can't.
people.
right.
She's got a voice on social media that I certainly don't have. 500 people follow her Instagram account, right? Like,
Yeah.
there is a realm of influence that I do not have.
Uh-huh.
Well, within her friends at school.
That's it, within her age group.
Yeah.
And may I say, because I'm the mom and I have the mic at the moment, she does use that role for advocacy and does engage in conversations. She's been drinking tap water for 2 years now, to call attention to the fact that there are many, many people in the world who don't have clean water. And so sometimes the influence is simply, hey, why aren't you having a Dr. Pepper?
Mhm.
Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And so there are conversations that happen there.
So influence, yes. Authority, you know,
Right.
when we play with those words, like
Right.
you used another one besides influence and authority.
Who knows? I don't remember.
Anyway, but influence, yes.
Well, I think that's important what you're saying there, because when you talk about the government, we need to think politically outside of politics as we
I
know.
agree with all that. In fact, that's the next thing on my outline.
Well,
That's
I'll
good
keep
to say.
talking.
Hey.
No, go for it.
You know, because I think it's not about, to me, it's not about getting the right person in office. It's not about getting the right laws on the books necessarily, as much as it is as making people aware of this, because it's going to take more. I mean, yes, we should do those things that you talk about, write letters, that sort of thing, but your senator may not be the most important person in that. It may be the CEO of your local corporation. That might be the person you have to, who's running, one of the refineries down here. Somebody's in a big, with some influence and perhaps some money that they could make a difference, which then might actually get attention of somebody that's in government. And so, I don't think when we think government, when we think, politics, we need to see that as the entire society as opposed to just
Right.
a small little chasm of democracy as we know it.
And I think exactly what Meg said, that idea of whatever the system is that's in place, if we're in a position to influence something that we think is wrong, you look at stories of advocacy in the Bible like Esther or Moses. I don't think God really cared who was king there. It didn't really matter who was Pharaoh. It was the position, it was that place of influence that had to be challenged, that had to hear from the advocate that.
Sorry.
Mhm, no,
just
yeah.
One more thing too, because this is the thing this bothers me, is that I think that if we spend our voice screaming about how horrible so and so is that's in office and how we need to turn this country around and get the right person, the more we talk like that, the less people are going to listen to us. We have serious things to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at Facebook and I see people complaining about our president now, and then I know that as soon as he gets replaced, whoever it's going to be, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, you're going to see the same thing.
Yeah.
Except for maybe
May or may not be the
different
same people,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And so, let's use our voice for the things that
Defending the poor and needy and the
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
Jesus said were important.
That's what's important. It doesn't matter if you work in an office with 3 people. You may have influence over those people that you don't realize just by the things you say and stand up for. Or you could be somebody who is a major CEO and is over hundreds of people, what his influences are. I didn't necessarily like my immediate supervisors at Jason's, but I had a great deal of admiration for Judge Torres because he is a very sweet, hardworking Christian man. And he used to post every day to us a scripture to think about. And he tried to run his business in a Christian manner and be fair with people. And, because some of my memories that are not good ones, I will never ever say anything bad about him.
And we will talk about that idea of using our dollars for influence too. I'm going to delay that conversation because we're going to do a session on consumption. So I'm going to kind of look primarily at influencing places of authority today. But I do want to share a couple of examples just to maybe kind of get our imagination going about how this works. And I apologize because I meant to bring my book and I was going to read a few things to you, but we can make this work, no problem. So one of the things that we'll talk about in the Ministry Micro Challenge that kind of wrote the curriculum that I'm using as the base for this, their primary focus is ending extreme poverty in the world. So I just kind of want to like say to you, there are 1,000 causes that might capture your imagination, and we can talk about all of those. And I hope that, you know, somewhere in this there are some things that capture your imagination. So sometimes that's where my examples will come from, but it's by no means all there is to talk about. But here are a couple of examples of advocacy and advocates working with government to bring about positive change in ways that maybe couldn't happen without government structures getting involved. One is the Jubilee 2000 campaign. Does anybody remember this? It was like toward the end of the Clinton administration. But in the late 90s, Christians in the global north primarily became aware of a lot of debt problems in the global south. And poverty issues created largely because of nations with major amounts of debt. Some of it what you would call odious debt, like acquired for not very good reasons or to fund places of corruption, or what was sometimes even illegitimate debt. But nations had large amounts of debt accrued against the interest of the major population or just irresponsibly, and sometimes funds even used to violate human rights and exploit the vulnerable. But for many countries, the overwhelming interest rate created sort of an inability to ever conceivably repay the debt. And so a significant portion of the population in these countries were living without basic human needs being met because almost all of their government resources were being used to service this debt that was never going to be repaid. And so there was, I think it involved the G8 and lots of influential nations, but a lot of it was Christian advocates asking companies and wealthy nations to take this biblical idea of the Jubilee. Anybody know what the Jubilee does?
It's like every
7 years, I think. But what happens in the year of Jubilee?
7 times 7.
Debts are forgiven. And so there was this very large number in the billions of dollars in debt forgiven to some of these countries. And I apologize because I was going to read you the essay about it that actually told you some of the impacts. I'll put it on the class website if you want to check it out there. There's some great facts. But you saw countries who were actually able to start doing things like building wells and getting people to school and beginning to address some of the problems of extreme poverty because not all of the national resources were diverted to debt. So that's a place where Christians work together with governments to get something done that that debt could not have been forgiven without the people who were owed the debt getting involved in that. The other one, did anybody watch the video for this week? Were you able to watch it? So this is one that Micro Challenge focuses a lot on, but it's this poverty-focused development assistance, which is kind of a catch-all term describing any foreign assistance given by the United States government for the purpose of poverty alleviation. And it currently consumes about 1% of the federal budget, but it's a pretty big number. 1% of the federal budget is a pretty large number. So I don't know how y'all feel about it. To me, if the government is willing to fund things like this, really good things can get done with it. And so I think there may be something to be said for we as voters advocating to those who legislate for us to continue to keeping something like that in the budget. And actually a lot is done by the government, but a lot of it is also farmed out to organizations we trust, like World Vision and Compassion International and Food for the Hungry, and Christian organizations who are then doing the work on the ground of, being with people and alleviating poverty in ways that make sense. And the bottom line is that funding is always at risk of being dramatically decreased, right? In my 8th grade social studies class, students learned about popular sovereignty. Anybody know what popular sovereignty is? 8th grader? She's not in my class. But power comes from where in the U.S. government?
People.
We the people, right? So our leaders don't fund programs that promote shalom, that promote flourishing, unless voters ask them to, right? That's where our voice comes from. So, I seriously, like, I sat for 2 hours yesterday trying to figure out how I wanted to talk about this because I'm fairly uncomfortable with the political aspect. But I don't know that there's any way of getting around the idea of being advocates for those in extreme need and those in extreme poverty without using those structures in which we're placed. I really like the way you said that, Meg. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
You want us to march? Have we got a bridge around here?
Maybe. I'm not ruling anything out.
I don't know about a bloody Sunday, but it could be a muddy Sunday.
I had somehow never made the connection between Christians and government and Esther and Moses.
Mhm.
Somehow.
Yeah. I'm not sure I had really thought about that role a whole lot in that way either until I started thinking about this.
It's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and
Right,
Abednego.
it's throughout the Old Testament.
Involved in pagan governments, and that's why I love the story of Daniel for that reason. Is that he was a high official in a pagan government, and he was well respected and well liked, which means that he wasn't picketing every day or
Right.
complaining every day or whatever. He
Or
was,
trying to unseat the officials.
yeah.
There was no need for that.
Within the rules.
He did an exceptional job.
And help them prosper. I think when you talk about politics too and involving in that, I think part of it is educating and not dismissing at face value what we think we already know.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, welfare. There's a lot of problems with helping the poor through government assistance. A lot of things going on there.
And there are things broken in the system,
Absolutely.
unquestionably.
So there's a lot of things there to discuss, but to really be truly educated and to say, here's what the problem is. I came in contact with a former high school classmate, and I did a blog post on it a couple of years ago, I think it was, who I found out just by talking to her on Facebook that she was homeless. She works with the homeless now in Kansas City. She was homeless for a year. And I heard her story or whatever. Now she talks about how the system is so broken. And the government system, the way it's set up, it really encourages it's not, she said, contrary to popular belief, she doesn't see a lot of people who are just trying to milk the system, that are just trying to stay on welfare and that sort of thing, even though there's surely that's out there. What she's seeing is that people just can't get above water, and it's kind of a whirlpool. The system is a whirlpool that sucks you back down. Even though they're helping and they're providing some basic needs, they can never get up to this point because there's at a certain point, if you get a job and you make this amount of money, your funding cuts off, which means you're worse off than you were before. And it's just like, well, how do you do that? Yeah,
And you
exactly.
can't get a job unless you have an address.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I just encountered it at the doctor's office last week. I had to upgrade my health care because the cheap insurance I had it didn't meet minimum standards. So I went to the doctor's office and paid twice as much as I did before the upgrade. And, had I not had insurance, I probably would have paid less. But yeah, I mean, and actually that's where I wanted to go next anyway. I want to talk about corruption, but I think that this is a good point too, that when we see things that are broken, maybe part of our role as advocates is to begin to advocate for fixing some of those broken pieces of the system, and maybe even for those who have the right imagination and the right set of skills to find better ways of doing things, to be problem solvers and to be part of that process as well. I gave you some statistics on corruption there, but corruption is perhaps, if we're talking about this idea of extreme poverty, corruption is perhaps one of the biggest barriers there is to overcoming extreme poverty. When money is stolen, when taxes are not paid, when natural resources are taken in the wrong ways, it is usually the poor who suffer the consequences of it. And I gave you some numbers there, which I'm glad I put in the handout because I left the book on my kitchen table. But in Africa alone, $148 billion a year are lost to people stealing and misusing funds. More than $200 million. Both of those other two statistics I found kind of staggering. Basically bribes being stolen from people who are consuming what should be free services like police services, school services that are supposed to be free, but parents are still being extorted money to access those things that should help alleviate the systems of poverty. So part of our role in advocacy, may be to bring about positive change and to bring relief and new systems, but part of it is to say, here's what's broken, here's what's going wrong, what can we do about those things? Any thoughts on that?
One of the things that I had trouble believing almost a few years ago was the fact that in Africa, these warlords will stockpile food
Yep.
to keep the people from eating it, so they will keep them under their control.
Right.
Keep them weak.
What amazes me, it's terrible, more than 200 million annually spent on bribes. BISD did more than that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I'm serious, we're in the hole 450 million plus.
Right here in our own town.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because we did not investigate when things first were starting rumors.
How come the district attorney's office did not do anything
Right.
when people were crying and complaining? And now we have a new district attorney in there, and there's no more investigations going on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also, if you looked at the voter turnout for our board of trustees,
Right.
it was pitiful. So again, it comes back to, if we want change, we have to get out there. I know you're probably
No,
saying
not at all.
But I think that's a prime example of
Yeah.
people
When
just
you
are.
have 10,000 people turn out for 100,000 populace, there's a problem.
There is a huge problem.
And what I will say, while I am grossly offended by that, and as frustrated as any other Southeast Texas resident who's been watching that situation, we are still among the privileged when it comes to these places of injustice. There are still agencies, there are people to go to when these places are found. There are ways to expose these stories, and in particular, I've been following some of the tweets and the posts today about World Women's Day. But
And we do have the right to protest.
we do, and the ability. When you look at the crimes against women around the world, in this country, there is at least a system for bringing it to attention and calling people into justice. And most places, crimes like that are completely ignored, if not even encouraged by government systems and law enforcement systems, or involving them. So it is a very, very tough dynamic.
I don't know the word I'm hunting for, but in so many of these countries, women and children both are just treated like a disposable commodity.
Absolutely.
Some of us that went to that big gathering, and we all were kind of impressed with Christine Kane, and I bought one of
Which,
her
by the way, if you're
books.
not familiar with Christine Kane, she's the founder of A21, which is, it's a ministry to end human trafficking. I mean, they do rescues, and they fight slavery in the world.
And that's, the first part of this book was about that she went to meet with some women that had been, kept as sex slaves for months in a apartment,
Right
whatever.
down the highway on
And one of the things that she said when she's sitting there in the room with these women after they've been rescued, they looked at her and said, "Where have you been? Where were you?" And she said, "I didn't have an answer." And she said, "I finally looked at him and said, I'm sorry, but I'm here now." And I think that just gave me shivers when, she's trying to comfort them, and they're like, "Where were you?" They needed, I needed rescue,
Yeah.
and I just thought that was huge.
There's a group.
She posted a statistic today that said 99% are never rescued.
There's a group of Christian women in Houston, and they actually call these escort services. They have a gentleman that works with them, he'll call and make a date. And when the girl shows up, they try to.
They're trying to do a rescue.
And they said, we can get you out of, we can disguise you and get you out of this hotel even if somebody's watching. And most of the time, the women will agree to go with them. But then they have a network all set up where they can get a medical, dental, they can house them somewhere, not a halfway house, in somebody's home where they can be nurtured to help them get out of that.
I want
And
to.
to me, that, when I saw that, I don't particularly watch MSNBC because I don't like that channel, but I saw it on the menu and I thought, I'm gonna watch that. And
Houston, you said?
Houston, yeah.
There.
And I thought, oh man, what rewarding work to help somebody get free of that.
And dangerous work.
Yeah.
No
Risking
question,
their
it's
lives.
dangerous.
Yeah.
I want to try to honor your time here for the most part, so I'm gonna try to kind of to bring it in here and so the what can you do component. I think the first thing is we need to know what the heck is going on. We need what's out there. What are the problems of injustice, and we've heard so many of them brought up from Beaumont to Houston and our state to the entire globe, and I think that we have to be concerned about all of those things. So, know what's going on, do some reading, do some research. We live in the information age. It is out there and readily available. Some of us have alluded to it already. Call your congressman. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the curriculum, I didn't plan on doing it, but there's a demystify it. Just pull out your cell phone and call a congressman, like right there together. Just get it done. But I did put some. That website is at the top of your handout again, and I'm keeping class resources on this webpage that I just kind of threw out there and threw together myself. So like if you miss a session, I'm recording the sessions and I'll put them on there. And these notes, if you're like me, I'm not very good with paper, so I like things that are in digital form on my screen because I am very organized in this world, but not so much things that make it to my car. So there's several buttons there. You can find your state representative, you can find your national representative, you can find your senator. If you're a social media person, there's a whole bunch of things where you can kind of call out senators on Twitter. Hey, I support the end of extreme poverty. Senator, whomever, do you? And they do, like Carrie said, they'll give you the script and let you sign their form letter. Use your voice to educate others and change negative attitudes, whatever that might look like, wherever you have a voice of influence. I alluded to Lainey having really quite a presence on social media. If that's your thing, if that's where you have an influence, I'm not very good at the Facebook world, but some of you are, right? If that's where your voice is, great, use it there. Your ideas? What can you do?
There's something that I discovered this week. It's called tabforacause.org.
Okay.
And I'm running Firefox. It's like a plugin. Every time you open a new tab in your web browser, you collect hearts, and those hearts, you can donate them to a whole list of different charities. And like water and human rights and just all kinds of stuff.
What does it do? Tabforacause.org. I'll put it on our
Yeah, I can
resources
write
on
it
the
down
class
for you.
page.
But what happens
So
when
essentially,
you
they're
donate
using
the
probably the
parts?
dollars of advertisers.
I'm
Through
guessing,
clicks
I'm
on
not really
web
sure
pages
how
and
it
things?
works, but
Very cool.
I mean,
That
it's
reminds
free,
me,
so whatever.
it reminds me of this app I found for when I run.
Uh-huh.
I don't like the, putting on Facebook how much exercise I just did. I don't want to
Check
brag
me
about
out.
it, but you can see once in a while it'll post to that. I'll post it. It'll say I just ran X amount of miles and supported Shoes for Souls is who I support. All it is an app that you put on your phone whenever you go walking or running or biking. Every mile they donate a certain amount, and so for me, it's like I think it's
The location services or whatever, like the GPS
Yeah,
is actually
GPS
tracking
tracks
your
you.
run.
And what it is like Timex is one of their supporters, and they donate X millions of dollars, and then you get to pick like 18 or 20 charities. And whenever you walk, if you're walking already, or if you're running already, you just hit that, starts it, and then you hit stop it, and then I post it to Facebook so people can see that. It's called Charity Miles. So that's little things like that you can do.
That are totally already a part of what you do. You're going to be on
Yes.
Firefox anyway. You're going to go for your run anyway. Absolutely. So your homework for next week, we'll talk about justice and prayer next week. Nehemiah 1 and 5 will be the scripture I'd like for you to read. Do a little research. See if you can identify an area of injustice that maybe matters a little bit to you. Or a lot bit to you, even better. What Lainey just passed around to you is a long-term action plan. So I like to think in tangible terms, like what does this mean to me, i.e. what am I going to do with it? And so this is something we'll be building over the coming weeks. Don't get nervous. I know that there's actually more parts on it than we have weeks left. We'll actually combine a couple of weeks. So I'm not going to overstay my welcome in the Trammell's living room or anything. But this week is building your advocacy piece of your long-term action plan. So it says, what is one way that you can speak out and be a voice for justice? Commit to something specific. Maybe it's a phone call or a letter a month. Maybe you're going to take on that idea of contacting your legislator. Maybe it's a promise to start talking to other people about this idea. Maybe it's a social media campaign. Use your imagination. But whatever it is, make it something that you will actually do. So if it's a small step, it's a small step. But it's actionable and it's attainable. And if you are like me and this gets lost in your car before you get home, it is also on the website. You can download it if you like digital things. I like digital things. I'll probably fill mine out on my computer, and that's where it will live. So anyway, that's there if you want it. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm 7 minutes late.
Oh my goodness.
But I will wind it down. Would someone pray for us before we dismiss? Or if not, I will.
Almighty God, we just thank you for this opportunity to join together. Help us, Lord, to realize how much strength, how big an opportunity, how much the way that we can change the world for the better. Show us the ways that each one of us need to be doing this. And in your Son's holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
What is the class website?
That handout right there, it's right there at the top.
Oh, okay, I thought that was something else.
That seemed like about 20 minutes.
Really? Oh, good. So you're not mad at me for going over?
I'm not.